Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Blue Heart webcast. And this is our feature of Murder and Mayhem with Lieutenant Joe and Marisa Joy, where we talk about cold cases. We talk about strange cases, all the things that people are always interested in when it comes to murder and mayhem. And with me today is the lovely and talented Marisa Joy. Marisa, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me here. I'm excited to talk about another episode. I think we have a good one today. I've brought some questions.
What would you like to talk about?
So today we're going to talk about a case that hits a little close to home for us, especially my dad. So in August of 1976, a pregnant woman was slain alone in her apartment in Kentwood Village in Brick. Despite the case, all these years later, still being open, they've never identified a suspect. And today we're going to be talking about the Kathy Leeds murder.
Outstanding. Okay, so a little background. Kathy Leeds was a woman who lived in Bricktown, New Jersey, on the Jersey Shore.
Mm-hmm.
I have some information from here that I'm going to look at. This comes from newspaper clippings and all of that.
And before you start, she was pregnant. And that was a big part of this case, right?
Yeah, she was 8 months pregnant at the time she was murdered. Now, it's interesting that I grew up in this area, and I remember hearing about this. Kentwood Apartments is not far from any part of Bricktown. So everybody in Bricktown, we don't have murders here, right? At the time, there was no murders in Bricktown. Very, very rare somebody gets killed. And this young woman, apparently, somebody broke into her apartment, the Kentwood Village Apartments, which is on Route 70. It's a major roadway, and it's not a rural town. There's a lot of people around. Yeah. This person went in and attacked her, killed her. I believe when her husband got home from work that night, found her dead. She was naked on the floor in her bedroom, and she had been attacked. And there was some things that came out years later in 1986 that apparently, like I said, she was 8 months pregnant. Whoever killed her tried to cut her stomach open. And there was some thought that maybe they were trying to steal the baby. We don't know.
Well, can I ask? Crazy. I want to interject. To me, we in modern times with like our internet and everything, we've seen so many cases of like disturbed women plotting for months to take another pregnant woman's baby. It's all the time. It's like a very common thing we're seeing. So it seems like if there was an effort to take the baby out of her stomach, that would be a huge motive there. Like, who would do that if the motive wasn't the baby?
Right. So I think first thing we need to address is the reality that when we talked in a previous episode about what does the crime scene tell you, we look at the situation and we go, first of all, you got this young woman and she's killed. Apparently, according to reports that came out at the time, let's see. She died of manual strangulation and hemorrhaging from chest wounds, stabs. Mm-hmm. So we think back to 1976. DNA was something of science fiction movies. Yeah. DNA is not something that had a place in criminal investigation. And we wonder now, is there evidence? So there's a couple things here.
Well, and also they found fingerprints. I know that because you mentioned DNA, and it's like they were just going off hunches back then. They weren't using any type of DNA.
We had a blood type. If you found blood, you could get a blood type, never knowing that it could be the answer, could be right in that blood. Yeah. And there were some fingerprints. So let me read a couple of things. Now, this is, I know detractors of police are going to jump on the police department and, they did it wrong. They did this, they did that, the other thing. You're talking about, we're going to compare modern forensics and law enforcement investigations to what happened in 1976. 1976 was 1,000 years ago when it comes to criminal investigation. So I do not fault the police department that investigated or the investigators, because they did what they could with the technology and the abilities that they had. So we got to put that in our heads straight when we're looking at this. So it says here, sometimes during the day on Friday, August 27th, 1976. Cindy's killer entered through the back window of her Kentwood Village apartment, directly across from a McDonald's and the shops at Brick on Van Zyl Road and Route 70 and Route 88. So it's in between two major highways and a shopping center. And apparently this person went in through the window. Now, how they determined that, I don't know. I don't have the police reports, but it says in this, I guess, contemporaneous report from 1976 or 1980 that they determined the killer went through the back window. So that would be a burglary. So when we start to look at these things, we say most murders are committed by people that know each other. The stranger murder is rare. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, because entering through the window is interesting, because you think if someone was going to appear as like a friendly, they would just, you'd see them through the peephole and she could have opened the door for them if she knew them. But that's not what we saw.
That's, well, and again, I didn't get a chance to investigate this. I'm going by what the reports say here. Now, what did the report? Now, interesting enough, in the course of my career, when I was moving into the detective bureau, I was sent to a homicide investigation school that was taught in Ocean County, where this murder took place. And one of, they went over a bunch of cases and they were looking at these different cases. They went over this case. And there's a lot of things that were revealed that I had no idea about, when you're reading newspapers, and I wasn't a cop at the time, I was just a kid, that you don't realize what the law enforcement people did. But again, we're looking at things we didn't know were evidence back then. They had no idea that there was DNA and you could do that kind of thing. So they just kind of looked at fingerprints and blood stains and things like that. So this person, they determined, came in, I guess, through a window. So you're right. If most killers know their victims, they could have knocked on the door if she had a relationship with this person, a friend, an associate. Oh, come on in, Bob. And then Bob comes in and does a bad thing, right? That doesn't seem to be the case by these reports. And again, they've been very closed-mouthed about the facts of a case. And you had asked me off camera, about the information that we release at a crime scene or this.
Yeah, this is something that I find really interesting. Is I know that a lot of investigators want to keep a tight lip, especially at first, because like you've explained, guilt knowledge. When you have someone confessing, if they know something no one else knows because you never put it out to the public, it's a good lead. So at a certain point, this case has been open like 50 years, basically. I'm always confused when, sketches aren't released or, information isn't given to the public after a certain amount of time so that they can help. Because I know you don't want to release a sketch right away and spook someone all the time. But at what point do you start asking for help from the public? Because it's been a long time.
Very good question. Very good question. When you see in the newspaper or you hear on the news that the police release some information about a crime, no matter what it is, they often release surface level details, basically who the victim was, if they have any suspect description. And in our modern world, in our politically correct world, we don't even get descriptions of the suspect sometimes, that makes people feel bad and all that kind of thing. But when the police release information, they always hold information back for exactly the reason you were talking about. If I have details of a crime scene and I know specific things were done in a crime scene, and then I have a suspect, and in the course of our conversation, they say something related to that crime scene that was not released from the newspaper or the news or TV, that only the killer would know, that kind of gives me some information. Either the person is the killer, or they know the killer, or they spoke to the killer and got this information. So when do you release that stuff? Well, sketches are very helpful. And in this case, there were a bunch of potential suspects back then. And I'll go through some of them in a minute. But there was a sketch released of someone who was seen in the area. How valuable are sketches? It depends. Depends
Hit or
on
miss.
the artist. It depends on what it is. So I'll tell you an interesting case I had. We had a gas station robbery. Very simple. A guy went in with a pipe, threatened the clerk, bashed the clerk over the head, could have killed him, but he didn't, knocked him out, guy bled all over the place. And the victim, we brought him in and he did a sketch, and we had a very talented sketch artist, and he did a really great sketch. And we used to have posters hanging up on the wall in our detective bureau. And I had a suspect. I developed a suspect. And there was a very small warrant for him. So we went out and arrested him on that warrant, brought him in, and now we're going to talk to him about this robbery. And in the course of that, he was sitting in the interview room with another detective, and I was talking to his girlfriend, the woman he lived with, had been with for multiple years. And she came down because of the warrant. She wanted to bail him out. So we brought her in. I wanted to talk to her, see if I can get some information. Where's he been? What's he all about? Anything new happened? Background, good stuff. And while we're sitting there talking, she turns around and she looks at the poster of the guy wanted for this robbery. And it doesn't have a name on it. It's just sketch. It says wanted for robbery. She looks at it and goes, "Why is Steven's picture hanging up on your wall?" And I said, "What did you say?" She goes, "Why is Steven's picture hanging up on your wall?" I said, "Do you think that picture looks like Steven?" She goes, "It looks just like him." I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. Sometimes people look alike." This was the sketch that we made from this robbery. Now here's the girlfriend, unprompted, looks at it and goes, wants to know why her boyfriend's picture's up there. So sometimes they can be great. Sometimes they're not helpful. Sometimes it helps us to get an idea of basically what the person looked like. So now you start to see a guy with long hair and a beard is the suspect. And these 5 people that you think might be involved in a thing like this, they all got short hair and no beards. Well, that's probably not them, right? It helps us to go, my neighbor kind of looks like that picture. It's a way to generate a lead. That neighbor might not be involved at all, but it's something to get started on. Who is that person? Oh, you find out they have a history for robberies. You find out, this, that, and the other, and then you investigate. And the next thing you know, you can develop a suspect. So it's all important.
Did this case have nothing more in terms of I'm curious, I always feel as a paranoid true crime person, like I'm safer living in an apartment because God forbid someone breaks in here, I yell, the walls are thin. People are going to be like, that girl needs help. I'm so curious, nothing from the area. No, we heard screaming.
No, apparently there was none of that in any of the reporting that I can see. Now, to be clear for my law enforcement people out there, homicide is an active case forever, right? There's no statute of limitations on homicide. So this is an active case. Mm-hmm. I did reach out to the PD and I did reach out to the prosecutor's office telling them, hey, I have this show. Would you want to send somebody on here to talk about it? Maybe, even though it's 50 years later, we have seen many, many times that 20, 30, 40 years later, people get a guilty conscience, or they go, my friend talked about this, but I never believed them. And then we're finding connections to these old murders.
And what do we see? I've seen so many times, which is hilarious every time, is people have a suspicion and they're, the cops have a suspicion. The person's mouth is shut. No one knows anything. Their ex-wife from 20 years ago calls up. I think that looks like my ex-husband. It's so crazy. You never know when someone's going to come forward.
And that's why I wanted to go to them and, treat it professionally. But there may be things that they could release that could generate some new leads. Like I said, it's been a long time. Maybe somebody goes, all these years I've been thinking about this, and my friend Bill said this one time, and I found it weird, and that could lead to connections. Now, evidentiary, we look at it. In a homicide, you collect lots of evidence, and you never get rid of that evidence. It's kept, it's stored, right, forever, even after a trial. If someone's found guilty and they go to prison. Now, the reality here is I'm sure they have a lot of evidence. The difference is how was it packaged 50 years ago? How was it maintained 50 years ago to go look at it now for DNA? So one thing that happens in some criminal cases, not a lot, but in some, you would say to yourself, and they haven't said here that she was sexually assaulted, but her stomach was cut open. Maybe you would have to think that maybe there was some kind of DNA evidence that they could have collected, but didn't know to collect. Now, I'm sure they did a sexual assault test. That would be a common thing when a woman is murdered. She's found nude. You would look under the fingernails. You would look for, those kind of things. Often we will see that the police, if they think they might have a suspect or a chance to get it, this evidence might have been packaged poorly.
Mm-hmm.
It might not have been stored properly, just because of the techniques of the time, not because anybody did anything wrong. Where would there be a source of that DNA today? On the body. So you often see that there's an exhumation that takes place sometimes in these cases. They will go back to the original source and look again. Now, 50 years, and I know this is gross and it's a horrible thing to think about, but 50 years of decomposition, even with embalming, is pretty thorough, at this point. But if it's possible to get DNA from the victim's body and now connected to a suspect, I think that would be a reasonable thing to consider. I don't know if they will or not. They know more about the case than I do, the condition of it. Maybe they have good DNA. They just didn't get a connection.
Yeah.
As an investigator, though, here's what I think. When we look at the crime, a robbery, how many robberies take place? Thousands. How many burglaries? Tons and tons of burglaries. How many times is a woman murdered and her stomach is cut open? That doesn't happen very often. It does happen, but it doesn't happen very often. Therefore, a person's mindset that would do that, maybe it's not the first time they've done it. Maybe they've done other things leading up to that. Maybe they've done things since then. Right? So we need to look at that because it is a unique crime. So you're right. What does that mean? And I see in the paper here, the newspaper articles or whatever came out, the information that's on the internet about this, that because her stomach was cut open, a consideration to the motive was maybe it was a woman who was trying to steal the baby. And like you said, Marisa, we've seen this. This happens. People go in, cut the baby out of a person and steal the baby. As crazy as that is, it happens. I think we have to put all those kind of pieces together. And I don't know what the investigators are doing and not doing, but it is active. And they said they wouldn't come on the show because it is still an active case. I spoke to the detective who's running the case still, assigned to this detective. And I have no doubt, just from his commentary, which he didn't give me any inside scoops or anything. He simply, said, hey, it's an active case. It's my case. I look at it constantly. I absolutely believe him because I'll tell you what, if I was still on the job and I had this case, I'd be constantly looking at this case because this is an unbelievable homicide that took place. This young woman's life was taken.
It's one of those cases too that is like so exceptionally brutal. It's not a robbery gone wrong. It's not a headshot. It's not domestic violence gone wrong, which is brutal, but it's like you see it. This is so unique and so jarring that I'm sure it's the type of thing like people have retired who worked on this and probably still think about it.
Yeah, well, in 50 years, that's 2 cops' careers. So the officers that did this, maybe they were 25 or 30 at the time. 50 years later, this 75, 80. These are old guys if they're still alive. But the case gets passed down to new investigators. Cold cases are never really closed unless there's a closure to the case. Someone's arrested, someone admits something. Unfortunately, and I think in some of our bigger communities that have multiple unsolved kind of crimes, you just don't have time. So what do we see across the country? We see a lot of agencies hiring retired detectives like me. Hey, do you want to come back and be part of a cold case squad and just take a look at these cold cases? Use your investigative skills and abilities to maybe generate a new lead, do re-interviews. Now that time has gone by, people's thinking changes over time. That if you murdered somebody back in the day and maybe it's been weighing on you ever since. Maybe as you had your own children and you saw someone the same age as the victim that you killed, that would weigh on you, right? And at some point in an interview, I might be able to read that in your body language and get you to, clean the soul. Other than sociopaths, most people that commit a crime, especially a violent crime, they do think about it and it does weigh on them. Now, what about gangbangers? They kill people every day. I'm not talking about that in general. Us, human beings, regular people. When we do something bad, we think about it. We go back to it over and over and over again. And that weighs on you. And one of the reasons we see people confess is because we have a need to cleanse our soul of what happened, what we did.
Interestingly enough, strongest emotion, stronger than fear, love, anything, is shame.
Shame, yes. Guilt, right? These things. So you can get people to confess many years later. We see these DNA cases where they hit on DNA from a 35-year-old murder, and the person comes in and it's an old man now, and he's sitting there, he starts crying and breaking down. I can't believe I did that. And, it can happen. Yeah. So let me throw out a couple more facts here about Kathy Leeds, or Cindy Leeds. She had a couple of different names that she went by. I'm not sure why, but they call her Cindy Leeds, and she's also known as Kathy Leeds. Her naked body was found on the bedroom floor about 5 o'clock at night. The detectives discovered several unidentified fingerprints inside Cindy's apartment. All right, so let's talk about that for a minute. We don't have DNA because we didn't have it at the time. Why would you have unidentified fingerprints? That has to be the killer.
No, because Cousin Joe visits, delivery guy comes in. They said they fix your furnace. That could be unrelated.
Right, and unless you've been arrested and fingerprinted for your fingerprints to go into the database, there'd be no record of your fingerprints. So you can have the killer's fingerprints could be there.
Yeah.
But was never arrested. Or it could be just like you said, the guy fixed the toilet one day, or the guy that came in and fixed the sink, and he happened to touch things. There's going to be fingerprints in people's homes. So that's interesting. This one is not good. This next fact is not good. There had been a bloody knife found in the kitchen sink. A bloody knife, the woman was cut open, she was stabbed. A bloody knife, pretty important. But it was accidentally rinsed off when somebody washed their hands. Maybe there was a lot of stuff in the sink. I'm imagining. Yeah. There was a lot of stuff in the sink. They didn't see the bloody knife in there. The killer threw it in there. And this person washes their hands off. Now, let's talk about that. In my course that I teach, criminal investigation, we talk about crime scenes, right? Every time you go into a crime scene, you bring things into the crime scene with you. Hairs, fibers, dirt on your pants, whatever. And every time you leave, you take things with you, right? Stuff comes out. You touch things and it comes out. So in the modern crime scene, we see that people go in where they wear booties. With these little plastic booties we put on outside. Everybody's gloved up, right? We're protected from dropping materials there and from taking stuff out with. When we come out the door, there's usually a big can there. You take your gloves and everything off, you throw it in there. So anything you brought out is now in there if you need to go look again. I don't know that we did that back in the day. I do some videos I use some videos in the course. The John Bonet murder, there's some video from that I use. There is the O.J. Simpson murders. I use that. There is the San Ysidro active shooter murders video. I use that. And very few people wore gloves. Very few people had booties on back in the day. We didn't understand what we know now. When you say 1976, that wasn't a million years ago. Law enforcement investigation was very raw, even 50 years ago. It's only now that technology has brought us to where we are. So investigators, cops, patrol officers, supervisors, pay attention when you show up at a crime scene. Who touched what? Who went where? Where are you going? When you're doing your sweep, all those kind of things. Protect that crime scene.
And I think this is a good place to add a little piece of advice that I think you could probably give to any law enforcement listening, anyone younger as well. In terms of securing a scene, if you're the first person who gets there, even if you're a beat cop, are you supposed to be making sure nothing is messed with? No one's washing their hands. No one's going in and out. That's the first person's job, right?
Right. Well, first person at the scene. What often happens? Now, in this case, it sounds like her husband came home, or somebody that knows her came home and found her deceased on the floor. So you call the police, 911. There's a woman hurt. There's a woman dead. My wife is dead. Whatever was said in the call. Now, the officers show up. They have some information. They know there's something bad, right? And they go there. They're going to go in and they're going to look. When things are found sometimes and you're unsure of what you're going to find, that's when officers often do a sweep, right? Because you don't know, there's not more victims, more bad people in this location. So you do a sweep. You shouldn't be touching things. A lot of times you might have a victim that's still alive, and first aid comes now, and they got tubes down their throat, they're pumping on their chest, there's medical stuff all over. If that person dies during that, or they determine that they're deceased, we often leave all that stuff right there. We identify all the people that were there. Mm-hmm. So if we have fingerprints, we need to get their fingerprints or whatever from the EMS people, we can do all that. But we leave all that stuff in place. The medical examiner would remove all the medical devices and all that kind of thing. So to make sure they get all the evidence. That first officer on scene, if they need to do a sweep, you do the sweep to make sure there's no more bad people and make sure there's no more victims. Then you come down and you secure that crime scene. That might mean putting up tape, calling for more backup, standing at the door. Don't let anybody else in other than law enforcement people that show up. Because sometimes, the neighbors will come over, right, or a spouse might be walking around touching things. Oh my gosh, what happened to you? And they're contaminating evidence. So we got to get people out of the crime scene. So protecting it is vital to having a good crime scene so that the evidence can count later on. All right. Go ahead.
No, I had a question that might take us a slightly different way, but you can continue if you want to. I don't want to interrupt.
I just wanted to cover some more of these things. The medical examiner, apparently her primary cause of death was manual strangulation, complicated, it says, by hemorrhaging from chest stab wound. So it sounds like she got stabbed, and complicated choking, complicated by the stab wound, sounds like she was probably inhaling the blood. Her lung might have been cut, and she was sucking it right through the chest wound or something. One of the knife slashes exposed Cindy's uterus. The fact that had not been made prior to 1986, and that's where things. Now there was also a possible 1976 summer murder in that area. There's some suspects here for some other things that happened. That maybe somebody was obsessed with her. Maybe somebody really liked. Obviously, somebody now either. The person, she was either targeted because someone wanted her, drive, I want her, or it was a crime of opportunity. Maybe somebody was breaking in and there's a woman there. So we often see a burglary. Somebody thinks the house is empty. They go in and then there's a female there or a child, and the child or the female, or I guess a male too, is sexually assaulted because it's an opportunity to add on to the crime. In this case, we don't know. But there were some other crimes that went on that summer that they looked at different people, not necessarily in the area, but they looked at them. But did they take DNA? Because they didn't have DNA. So how did they take it, right? So I could see this case as a good relook to really go back and look at this and, pull out what evidence that they can, because it's really a shame. This young woman, a pregnant young woman, murdered. Brutally, as you said, to start this whole thing. And where do we go? Where do we go from here?
My question, kind of maybe a rounding off question, is from the outside, I watch CSI, I watch Law and Order. There's this idea that when you ask an officer for another look at a case, or the FBI comes in to help or something, there's this level of, it's portrayed of like, oh, I don't want another look at this, like I'm handling this case. It's like pride almost. Do you have anything to say to younger officers about how much an extra or a new set of eyes, does that actually help with a cold case, or like restarting?
Okay, great. That's a great question. I don't see in cold cases that ego, because like we said, these cops that investigated this, they're long gone. They've been gone 25 years already, probably. In active cases, there can be a little bit of, hey, this is my case. What are you doing trying to insert yourself in my case? And one of the things that I teach all the time is that officers do fall victim to. You have to have a investigative hypothesis. When you go in, you look at what happened, what went on here, and you ask yourself, well, who could have done this, right? And we often see like the wife is dead and the husband's alive. Well, the husband did it because we know the husband did it. Well, most times the husband did do it, but not every time. And if we go in with this, closed mind that it's got to be the husband, and that you focus all your attention on that, you can miss things and go wrong. So it's okay to have your investigative hypothesis. You're doing the investigation, you find out they had domestic violence, they had problems. they said and did things that people were uncomfortable with the relationship, and now the wife ends up dead? Sure, the husband might have done it. Let me put that over here in this box, and I will pursue that possibility. But what else does the evidence, crime scene, and witnesses tell me that it could be somebody else, right? So in this case, I look at this and I say, you know, of all the cases that I've looked at over the years, there could be DNA here that we haven't explored yet. Just like in John Bonet, there's new touch DNA that, even though they had DNA that didn't exist, touch DNA. You can get stuff off our clothes, things that have not been examined yet, and they're looking forward to doing that. Well, in this case, we might have that as well. Yeah. And is that worthy of a second look? Yes. To finish your question, Marisa, and then we'll jump out of here, is what do people think? Do second eyes help? Yes, second eyes do help for that exact reason. If you have, at the time, whether it's a long time ago or last week, and officers, depending on their experience, the time they have on the job, what they've learned, how they interact, their personalities, you might look at something and they just lock into that investigative hypothesis. That's what happened. A new set of eyes might come in and go, well, we've been thinking that for 30 years and that hasn't gotten us anywhere. Let me just look at all of this again. And that's what they do. They take the case files, which are usually in boxes, they lay them out, and you read the reports. Because a lot of times in a big case like this, there are tons of reports and statements, and you have one lead detective and then a bunch of detectives helping. And hopefully you're having meetings and you're discussing what you're finding every day. You do a new punch list. It's a very detailed operation. But sometimes things get missed depending on experience. You know, if the police department has a detective that's been a detective for a year and all they've ever done is property crimes, and now you have a homicide, hopefully there's a larger agency that's going to help. But they could miss things because they just don't have the experience, not because they're bad, because they don't have the experience. So a new set of eyes is very, very helpful to come in, just look at everything again, cold, read it all over and go, hey, wait a minute. Did we ever talk to this person? They're mentioned by 3 different people, and I have the list of people they interviewed. I don't see that person's name on here. Mm-hmm. How come they weren't interviewed? And then you find out if the old cop is still around. Well, we didn't think anything of that guy. We didn't think he had any chance of doing it. He had a bad leg. He could. Oh, wait a minute. He was still mentioned. You should interview him. So that's where cold case detectives go back, relook at the whole thing, and start the investigation over, reread the statements, go re-interview people, because people's hearts change over years. You know, I never wanted to mention anything, but my brother had these problems. And I always said, boy, that sounded like something he would say, things like that. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's always a good idea to go back and look again, especially when you're dealing with a homicide where a young woman was murdered in her apartment, right? So I hope that someday we can solve this crime, that this can be figured out who did this, and they can be held to account, because somebody's life was taken. They were robbed of their life, robbed of their baby. The baby was killed. The family suffered all of this. And part of our jobs as law enforcement is to be the voice for the voiceless. Mm-hmm. People that cannot speak for themselves, especially in a homicide. You are their voice, right? Be loud, figure out what happened, and bring them some justice. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. Marisa, thank you for being here. You always ask good questions and help us to educate everybody out there. So remember, Murder and Mayhem with Lieutenant Joe and Marisa Joy. Make sure you ring the bell. I don't even know if I have a bell, but subscribe, like it, tell your friends about it, and we will see you down the road on our next episode. See you, Marisa.
Bye. Thank you.